On a crisp September morning in London, Derek Thompson strolled down the busy streets near Buckingham Palace, wearing designer clothes that screamed new money. At 26 years old, with perfectly styled blonde hair and a smile that had never known hardship, he was streaming live on TikTok to his 2.5 million followers. "Watch this, guys. This is going to be epic." Derek spoke into his phone, waving a can of bright yellow construction foam he bought from a hardware store earlier that morning. His followers' comments flooded the screen, some encouraging him, others warning him to stop what they knew he was about to do. Back home in Boston, Derek was known as the troublemaker son of Thompson Construction Empire. His father had built the company from scratch, but Derek had never shown interest in honest work. Instead, he gained fame for his increasingly dangerous social media pranks, each one more outrageous than the last. The royal guard, James Wilson, stood at his post, perfectly still in his traditional red uniform and bearskin hat. At 34, he was a decorated veteran who had served in Afghanistan before joining the Queen's Guard. This morning was like any other. Tourists taking photos, children pointing, and the occasional person trying to make him smile. Little did he know, this ordinary day would soon turn extraordinary. Derek's livestream count kept climbing as he approached the guard. "This is going to get me to 3 million followers for sure," he mumbled, the smell of expensive whiskey still on his breath from last night's party. The construction foam felt heavy in his hand, and his heart raced with anticipation. Several tourists noticed Derek's suspicious behavior. Sarah Chen, a student from Singapore, even tried to stop him. "Sir, please don't disturb the guard," she said, reaching for his arm, but Derek brushed her off with a laugh. "It's just a joke," he slurred, stumbling slightly. "Everyone's going to love this." The live stream comments were now split between excitement and horror. "Oh, undo it. This isn't funny. You're going to get arrested." Legendary content coming. At precisely 9:47 a.m., Derek raised the can. Time seemed to slow down. James Wilson, maintaining his professional composure, saw the movement from the corner of his eye but stayed statue still, following his strict training. The spray of yellow foam hit James directly in the face. The next few seconds were chaos. The construction foam, meant for filling gaps in walls, began expanding immediately. James, trained to remain still under almost any circumstance, broke protocol as the chemical burned his eyes and blocked his airways. He dropped his rifle and clutched at his face, falling to his knees. Nearby tourists screamed. Sarah Chen quickly called emergency services. 2 police officers who had been patrolling nearby sprinted toward the scene, while another guard rushed to help his fallen comrade. Derek, still streaming, backed away laughing. Oh man, this is going viral," he exclaimed, seemingly oblivious to the severity of what he'd just done. His followers watched in real time as one officer tackled him to the ground, the phone flying from his hand but still broadcasting. The construction foam continued expanding, covering most of James's face. A tourist who happened to be a nurse, Maria Gonzalez, ran to help, using bottled water to try washing away the chemicals. "He needs medical attention immediately," she shouted to the gathering crowd. Within minutes, sirens wailed in the distance. The area around Buckingham Palace, usually filled with happy tourists, had transformed into a crime scene. Police cordoned off the area while paramedics rushed to treat James, whose face had begun showing signs of chemical burns. Derek, now in handcuffs, finally seemed to grasp the gravity of his actions. His designer clothes were dirty from being tackled, and his perfect hair was a mess. As officers led him to a police car, he kept repeating, it was just supposed to be a prank. Just a prank for views. The video, though quickly removed from TikTok, had already been captured and shared across multiple platforms. By noon, it had reached news outlets worldwide. The headline, "Rich Tourist Attacks Royal Guard," began trending on social media, and Derek Thompson's name was about to become infamous for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, in a speeding ambulance, James Wilson fought for every breath, his face burning from chemicals never meant to touch human skin. His 12 years of military service, including 2 tours in Afghanistan, hadn't prepared him for this kind of attack. As the ambulance raced through London's streets, none of the participants knew that this was just the beginning of a story that would shock both nations. The emergency room at St. Thomas Hospital burst into action as James Wilson arrived. His face, still partially covered in hardened construction foam, had turned an angry red where the chemicals had burned his skin. Dr. Sarah Matthews, the lead emergency physician on duty, immediately recognized the severity of the situation. "Get him to decontamination now," she ordered, her voice sharp with urgency. The team worked quickly, using special solutions to dissolve the foam while trying to minimize further damage to James's skin and eyes. Meanwhile, across London at the police station, Derek Thompson sat in an interrogation room. His designer clothes were wrinkled, and his confident smirk had disappeared. Two detectives from Scotland Yard, Inspector Roberts and Sergeant Hayes, entered the room with stern faces. "Do you understand what you've done?" Inspector Roberts asked, placing photographs of James's injuries on the table. Derek's face went pale as he saw the images. I didn't know it would do that," Derek stammered, pushing the photos away. "The can just said it was foam. Like those silly string pranks, you know." Sergeant Hayes leaned forward. "Construction foam is industrial-grade material. It contains isocyanates and other toxic chemicals. You could have killed him." Back at the hospital, James's wife Emma rushed through the corridors, their 5-year-old daughter Lucy clutching her hand. When she reached the emergency department, she found James's commanding officer, Colonel Richards, already waiting. "Mrs. Wilson," the colonel said gently, "the doctors are doing everything they can, but we need to prepare for the possibility of permanent damage to his eyes." Emma sat heavily in a nearby chair, pulling Lucy onto her lap. "He survived 2 tours in Afghanistan," she whispered, "only to be attacked by some rich kid with a phone." The news of the attack spread like wildfire. Outside Buckingham Palace, reporters gathered in droves. Sarah Chen, the student who had tried to stop Derek, found herself being interviewed by the BBC. "I saw the whole thing," she explained, her voice shaking. "He was laughing, streaming it live. He didn't care that he was hurting someone." At Thompson Construction headquarters in Boston, Derek's father, Robert Thompson, was in crisis mode. His phone hadn't stopped ringing since the incident. Major clients were threatening to pull contracts, and the company's stock was plummeting. "Get me the best lawyers in London," he barked at his assistant. "And book me on the next flight out. My idiot son just destroyed 30 years of our family's reputation in 30 seconds." Social media exploded with rage. The hashtag #JusticeForJames trended worldwide. Derek's previous prank videos resurfaced, showing a pattern of increasingly reckless behavior, all funded by his family's wealth and encouraged by millions of followers. By evening, Dr. Matthews had more news for Emma. "The good news is, we managed to remove all the foam," she explained. "The bad news is that James has suffered second-degree chemical burns on his face and severe corneal damage to both eyes. We won't know the full extent of his vision loss until the swelling goes down." In the hospital room, James lay quietly, his face covered in bandages. The steady beep of monitors filled the silence as Emma held his hand. Lucy drew a picture of her daddy in his guard uniform, too young to understand why he couldn't see it. At the police station, Derek's situation worsened. His passport had been confiscated, and the charges were piling up. Assault, reckless endangerment, disrupting a royal guard on duty, and possession of a dangerous substance with intent to cause harm. "Your father's lawyers can't help you this time," Inspector Roberts told him. "The Crown takes attacks on royal guards very seriously." For the first time in his life, Derek Thompson felt real fear. His phone and social media accounts had been seized as evidence. His followers couldn't help him now. The construction foam sat in an evidence bag, its warning labels clearly visible. Danger. Harmful if inhaled or in contact with skin and eyes. As night fell over London, 4 lives had been forever changed. James Wilson lay in a hospital bed, his career and eyesight hanging in the balance. Emma Wilson wondered how to explain to their daughter why Daddy couldn't come home. Derek Thompson faced the real possibility of prison time. This privileged bubble finally burst. And Robert Thompson boarded a plane to London, knowing that all his money might not be enough to fix his son's biggest mistake. The story was far from over, and tomorrow would bring new challenges for everyone involved. The morning newspapers hit the stands with explosive headlines. "Royal Guard blinded by American PRNKSDR," screamed the Sun. The Times went with "Social media stunt turns to international incident," while American papers focused on the Thompson family angle. construction hairs puree NK sparkas diplomatic crisis. Robert Thompson's private jet landed at Heathrow Airport at 6 a.m. Reporters swarmed him as he exited customs, their cameras flashing wildly. His usual confident stride was replaced by a weary stumble as he pushed through the crowd, ignoring questions about his son. At the American Embassy in London, phones rang non-stop. The ambassador, Jennifer Martinez, faced mounting pressure from both sides. The British government wanted severe punishment, while influential American business leaders connected to Thompson Construction pushed for leniency. "This isn't just about one foolish young man anymore," Ambassador Martinez told her staff. "This has become a matter of international relations." Meanwhile, at St. Thomas Hospital, James Wilson received devastating news. Dr. Matthews removed his bandages for the first evaluation, and the results weren't good. "The chemical burns have caused severe damage," she explained gently. "Your right eye has about 20% vision remaining. The left eye," she paused, "shows no response to light at all." Emma squeezed her husband's hand as he absorbed the news. James, his face still red and blistered, spoke for the first time since the incident. "What about returning to duty?" The silence that followed was answer enough. Across London, in his holding cell, Derek Thompson wasn't faring much better. His father's expensive lawyers had arrived, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. The live-stream video had been downloaded thousands of times before being removed, and new angles from tourist cameras kept emerging. "They're calling for 10 years, his lead lawyer, Richard Bennett, explained. "The prosecution wants to make an example of you." Derek, who hadn't slept since his arrest, looked nothing like the confident prankster from his videos. "Can't we just pay them off?" he asked, showing his privileged mindset was still intact. "Everyone has a price, right?" Bennett shook his head. "This isn't a civil matter you can settle. The Crown is prosecuting you. Money won't make this go away." The story took another turn when James Wilson's military background came to light. A decorated veteran, he had saved 3 fellow soldiers during an ambush in Afghanistan. The British public's anger intensified when they learned this hero might never serve again because of a social media prank. #Justice for James evolved into a movement. A GoFundMe page for his medical expenses reached £500,000 in just hours. Celebrities and politicians voiced their support. Even the royal family issued a rare statement expressing deep concern for their guard's condition. Robert Thompson tried damage control, holding a press conference outside his son's law firm. "We deeply regret this unfortunate incident," he read from a prepared statement. "The Thompson family will cover all medical expenses and—" He was cut off by an elderly woman who broke through the press barrier. She was Mary Wilson, James's grandmother, and she'd taken 3 buses to get there. "My grandson protected your queen," she shouted, her voice carrying across the crowd. "And your son treated him like a joke for internet fame." The video of Mary Wilson's intervention went viral, adding another layer to the already explosive story. Thompson Construction's stock continued to plummet, losing 40% of its value in 2 days. Back at the hospital, James focused on his recovery while Emma handled the growing media attention. Lucy, still trying to understand what happened to her daddy, made him a paper crown. "Because you're as brave as the Queen's guards," she told him, placing it carefully on his head. The doctors started discussing rehabilitation options, but the reality was harsh. James would never regain full vision. His career as a royal guard was over, and his future remained uncertain. As the 3rd day since the incident drew to a close, the story had become more than just a viral video gone wrong. It had become a symbol of everything wrong with social media culture, privilege, and the pursuit of internet fame at any cost. In his cell, Derek Thompson finally understood what his father had always told him: actions have consequences. But for him, understanding came too late, and the consequences were just beginning to unfold. The Old Bailey stood imposing against the grey London sky as Derek Thompson's trial began. News cameras lined the street, and protesters held signs reading "No Justice, No Peace, and Protect Our Guards." Inside courtroom 3, Derek sat between his lawyers, wearing a perfectly tailored suit that couldn't hide his nervous fidgeting. Crown Prosecutor Victoria Blackwood rose to deliver her opening statement. "What we have here," she declared, "is not a prank gone wrong, but a deliberate assault driven by arrogance and a desperate need for social media fame." The evidence was damning. The prosecution played Derek's live-stream video showing him buying the construction foam, ignoring warning labels, and bragging about his plans. The courtroom fell silent as they watched James Wilson collapse, struggling to breathe. "Look at the defendant's reaction," Prosecutor Blackwood pointed out. "He's laughing as a man fights for his life." Derek's lead defense attorney, Richard Bennett, tried to paint his client as a misguided young man caught up in internet culture. "My client had no intention to cause serious harm," he argued. "He is a product of our times, where likes and views cloud judgment." The first witness called was Sarah Chen, the student who tried to stop Derek. "He smelled of alcohol," she testified. "When I warned him, he just laughed and said it would make him famous." During cross-examination, Bennett questioned her memory. "Weren't you just another tourist taking photos? How can you be sure about what you heard?" Sarah remained firm. "Because I recorded it on my phone. I thought he might do something stupid." Her video played next, showing Derek's dismissive behavior and slurred speech. The jury watched intently as Bennett's strategy began crumbling. Outside the courthouse, Robert Thompson faced his own battle. Major clients were canceling contracts, and the company's reputation was in tatters. His phone buzzed with another message. The board was calling an emergency meeting to discuss his removal as CEO. The trial's most powerful moment came when James Wilson took the stand. His face still showed scars, and he wore dark glasses to protect his damaged eyes. The courtroom hushed as he spoke. "I stand still for hours every day," he explained. "Tourists make faces, wave hands, take photos. That's normal. But that morning, I felt something wet hit my face. Then burning. Then darkness." Emma Wilson watched from the gallery, holding Lucy's hand. Their daughter had drawn another picture, this time of her daddy in the witness box, being brave. Dr. Matthews testified next about James's injuries. "The chemical burns were severe," she explained, showing medical photographs that made some jurors wince. "Mr. Wilson has permanently lost vision in his left eye. His right eye retains minimal function." During a break, Derek's lawyers desperately tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecution's response was firm. They would accept nothing less than prison time. The defense called character witnesses, Derek's college professors, family friends, even his childhood nanny, all testifying about his good heart and youthful mistakes. But their words seemed hollow against the evidence of his previous social media pranks, which the prosecution had collected. This was not his first dangerous stunt, Prosecutor Blackwood demonstrated. Just his worst. She showed clips of Derek harassing street performers, pushing strangers into fountains, and destroying public property, all for views and likes. The most surprising testimony came from Derek's younger sister, Amanda Thompson. Called by the prosecution, she revealed years of similar behavior. "He once put laxatives in our grandmother's tea for a video," she admitted. "Dad always paid people off to keep things quiet." As the fourth day of trial ended, Derek sat alone in a holding cell. His father had stopped visiting, focused on saving the company. His millions of followers had moved on to new content. His phone, his audience, his lifestyle, all gone. Back at the Wilson home, James listened to Lucy read him a bedtime story. He couldn't see her face clearly anymore, but he could hear the love in her voice. Emma watched from the doorway, wondering what the jury would decide. The trial was far from over, but public opinion had already rendered its verdict. The age of consequence-free pranks was ending, and Derek Thompson had become its poster child. In his cell, Derek finally started writing the apology letter his lawyers had suggested weeks ago. But as he struggled to find the right words, he realized no apology could restore James Wilson's sight or undo the damage his quest for viral fame had caused. As Derek Thompson's trial continued to dominate headlines, the media's attention shifted to James Wilson's remarkable life story. A documentary crew from the BBC arrived at the Wilson family's modest London home to film The Man Behind the Uniform, revealing a story of service and sacrifice that touched millions. "James always wanted to serve," his mother Margaret told the cameras, showing old photographs of a young James in his cadet uniform. Even as a boy, he would stand at attention in front of the mirror, practicing his guard stance. The documentary revealed how James, born in a working-class neighborhood in Leeds, had worked 2 jobs to help support his family after his father's early death. Despite the hardships, he pursued his dream of military service, graduating at the top of his class. In Afghanistan, James had earned the Military Cross for extraordinary bravery. During an ambush, he had carried 3 wounded comrades to safety under heavy fire. The medal ceremony footage showed a proud soldier, standing tall in his uniform, unaware that years later he would face a different kind of attack on the streets of London. Emma shared their love story, how they met when James was recovering from a combat injury. "He was the strongest person I knew," she said, wiping away tears. "Now he has to relearn everything, how to navigate our home, how to read Lucy's bedtime stories using Braille." The public was particularly moved by footage of James attempting to maintain his dignity while learning to cope with his new reality. With a mobility instructor's help, he practiced using a white cane, his movements uncertain but determined. "The hardest part isn't the physical pain," James explained during an interview. "It's not being able to see my daughter smile anymore. Lucy drew me a picture yesterday, and I could only feel the crayon marks with my fingers." The documentary also featured James's fellow guards, who broke their traditional silence to speak about their colleague. "Wilson was our best," said Sergeant Michael Brooks. "He never broke character, never complained during the longest ceremonies. Now we all feel vulnerable. If this could happen to him?" Meanwhile, support for the Wilson family continued to grow. Veterans organizations rallied around them. The Queen's Guard Association established a foundation in James's name to help service members injured by civilian attacks. Even some of Derek Thompson's former followers started a campaign called "Views Don't Trump Lives," encouraging responsible social media behavior. Lucy's school held a special assembly about her father's service. The 6-year-old stood proudly before her classmates, explaining why her daddy wore dark glasses now, but was still the bravest guard ever. The video of her speech went viral for all the right reasons, unlike the one that had changed their lives. Dr. Matthews appeared in the documentary's medical segment, explaining the permanent nature of James's injuries. The construction foam caused irreversible damage, she demonstrated using medical imaging. The chemicals literally burned through the corneal tissue. No amount of surgery can restore what was lost. The Wilson family's quiet dignity in the face of tragedy struck a chord with viewers. Unlike the Thompson family's dramatic public meltdown, James and Emma focused on healing and adaptation. They turned down lucrative offers for exclusive interviews and refused to monetize their story. "We're not interested in fame or revenge," Emma stated firmly. "We just want to rebuild our lives and make sure this never happens to another service member." The documentary's most powerful moment came when James returned to Buckingham Palace, not as a guard but as a visitor. Using his white cane, he walked the familiar path where he had once stood watch. Other guards snapped to attention as he passed, a show of respect that moved onlookers to tears. "I may not wear the uniform anymore," James said, standing in his old spot, "but the duty to serve never leaves you. Now I serve by speaking out against the culture that treats people as props for entertainment." As the documentary aired, its impact was immediate. Parliament began discussing stricter penalties for assaulting service personnel. Social media platforms introduced new policies against prank videos targeting uniformed officers. James Wilson's story had become more than a cautionary tale. It was catalyzing real change. In the Wilson home that evening, James sat in his favorite chair, listening to Lucy practice reading. He couldn't see her face, but he could hear her growing confidence with each word. Emma watched them both, knowing that while their lives had changed forever, their family's strength had only grown stronger. The next day, they would return to court for the trial's closing arguments, but for now, they focused on what mattered most, healing together, one day at a time. The Old Bailey buzzed with tension on the final day of Derek Thompson's trial. The public gallery was packed, with some people having queued since dawn to secure a seat. James and Emma Wilson sat in the front row, their presence a silent reminder of why everyone was there. Prosecutor Victoria Blackwood delivered her closing argument with measured fury. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, "we've seen the evidence. We've heard the testimonies. This wasn't a prank. This was an assault driven by vanity and a complete disregard for human dignity." She played one final clip, Derek's previous TikTok video where he bragged about his plans. "Tomorrow, I'm going to do something that'll break the internet," his recorded voice echoed through the courtroom. "Those boring guards won't know what hit them." Derek slumped in his chair as his own words condemned him. His designer suit, now wrinkled from weeks of wear, hung loosely on his frame. The cocky social media star had been replaced by a pale, frightened young man facing serious prison time. Defense attorney Richard Bennett made his final attempt to save his client. "My client accepts his actions were foolish," he argued. "But he never intended to cause permanent harm. He's a product of our times, where the line between entertainment and assault has become dangerously blurred." The jury looked unimpressed. Several members glanced at James Wilson, his dark glasses a permanent reminder of that entertainment. During the lunch break, reporters cornered Robert Thompson outside the courthouse. The once powerful CEO looked broken. His company's stock had plummeted 70%. The board had forced him to step down, and his family name had become synonymous with reckless privilege. "No comment," he muttered, pushing through the crowd, but everyone noticed he didn't stand beside his son anymore. Back in court, the judge began his instructions to the jury. "You must consider the evidence objectively," he stated. "The defendant's wealth, social media status, or family connections should not influence your decision." As the jury filed out to begin deliberations, Derek finally broke down. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, looking toward James Wilson. "I didn't know. I never thought." The words echoed hollowly in the courtroom. Emma Wilson squeezed her husband's hand but remained silent. Their daughter Lucy's drawing of her daddy in his guard uniform sat folded in her pocket, a reminder of what Derek's quest for views had cost their family. The jury's deliberation was surprisingly brief. After just 4 hours, they returned with their verdict. The courtroom fell silent as the foreman stood. "On the charge of causing grievous bodily harm with intent, how do you find the defendant?" "Guilty." "On the charge of assault on a member of the Queen's Guard?" "Guilty." "On the charge of reckless endangerment?" "Guilty." Derek's face went ash-white. His lawyers immediately began preparing for appeals, but the damage was done. The judge would announce sentencing the following day, but legal experts predicted significant prison time. Outside the courthouse, James Wilson faced the press. Despite his injuries, he stood tall, speaking with the dignity that had characterized his military service. "Today isn't about revenge," he stated clearly. "It's about accountability. Social media fame cannot be an excuse for destroying lives. I hope others learn from this before more people get hurt." The case had already sparked changes. Parliament was fast-tracking new laws about filming and harassing service personnel. Social media platforms were implementing stricter policies about prank videos. Schools were adding digital citizenship courses to their curricula. In a small office nearby, Derek wrote a final message to his followers, to be posted after sentencing. "Fame isn't worth another person's life or health. I learned this too late. Don't be like me." The media circus would soon move on to other stories, but the impact of the case would linger. James Wilson would never regain his sight or his position as a royal guard, but his dignity in the face of tragedy had transformed him into a different kind of public servant, a voice against the darker side of social media culture. As night fell over London, two families faced very different futures. The Wilsons returned home to Lucy's welcoming hugs and the challenge of building a new life. The Thompsons faced disgrace, financial ruin, and the prospect of their son behind bars. Tomorrow would bring the sentence, but the real verdict had already been delivered by society itself. No number of views was worth the price of another person's well-being. The sentencing day arrived with heavy rain falling over London. Judge Harrison entered courtroom 3 with a thick stack of papers, his face grave as he prepared to deliver Derek Thompson's sentence. "Stand up, Mr. Thompson," the judge ordered. Derek rose shakily, his expensive suit replaced by a simple dark blazer. The past weeks in custody had stripped away his influencer polish, leaving behind a young man who finally understood the weight of his actions. "Your actions were not just a prank gone wrong," Judge Harrison began. "They were a calculated attempt to gain fame at the expense of a public servant's well-being. This court sentences you to 5 years in prison, with a minimum of 3 years to be served before eligibility for parole." The judge wasn't finished. "Additionally, you are ordered to pay £2 million in compensation to James Wilson and his family. You are banned from all social media platforms for 10 years following your release, and you must complete 1,000 hours of community service working with disabled veterans." Derek nodded silently, accepting his fate. As officers led him away, he looked one last time at James Wilson, but the former guard couldn't see his expression of remorse. 6 months later, the story had evolved in unexpected ways. James Wilson, adapting to his new life, had become an influential speaker at schools and universities. His message about social media responsibility resonated with young people in a way that traditional warnings never had. "I don't want your pity," he would tell audiences, standing tall despite his dark glasses. "I want your understanding that every action on social media has real consequences for real people." Emma had started a foundation called Guard Dignity that worked to protect service personnel from harassment. The organization had already helped pass new laws in several countries, making it a criminal offense to interfere with ceremonial guards for social media content. Lucy, now 7, had become her father's biggest helper. She learned to describe everything she saw in detail, becoming his eyes to the world. "Daddy," she would say, "the flowers in our garden are yellow today, like little suns smiling at us." Derek Thompson's story took a different turn. In prison, stripped of his phones and followers, he began to change. He started a program teaching fellow inmates about the dangers of social media addiction. His letter of apology to the Wilson family, written after 3 months behind bars, showed genuine remorse. Robert Thompson, humbled by the scandal, sold his company and used much of his fortune to establish a fund for injured service personnel. The Thompson name slowly began to represent redemption rather than reckless privilege. The construction foam incident sparked a global movement. #ThinkBeforeYouFilm became a worldwide campaign. Social media platforms introduced strict policies against prank videos targeting service personnel or vulnerable individuals. Schools added mandatory classes about digital citizenship and empathy. 1 year after the incident, James Wilson stood again outside Buckingham Palace. This time, he was there to receive an MBE, Member of the British Empire, for his services to public awareness and veteran support. The Queen's Guard performed a special salute as he passed, their boots stamping in perfect unison. Emma watched proudly as her husband navigated the palace steps with his white cane, Lucy holding his other hand. The little girl wore her father's guard medals on her dress, pinned carefully by her mother that morning. The media coverage was different now. Instead of sensational headlines about a tragic attack, it focused on the positive changes that had emerged from the incident. James Wilson had transformed from victim to advocate, his story inspiring a new generation to think before they act. Derek Thompson watched the ceremony on the small TV in his prison common room. His fellow inmates fell silent as James Wilson received his medal. Derek's prison journal entry that night read, "Some mistakes can't be undone, but they can teach others to be better." The final chapter of this story wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about transformation. James Wilson couldn't regain his sight, but he had gained a powerful voice. Derek Thompson lost his freedom but found his conscience, and society learned a valuable lesson about the true cost of viral fame. As the Wilson family left Buckingham Palace that evening, Lucy looked up at her father. "Are you still a guard, Daddy?" she asked. James smiled, squeezing her hand. "In a different way, sweetheart. Now I guard people from making the same mistakes that hurt our family." The story of the tourists and the guard had ended, but its impact continued to ripple through society, changing lives and attitudes one person at a time.